Previously on the Seventh Valkyrie, Strena's daring nighttime escape earns her a strict punishment until the arrival of the Winter Festival. What does Rene's brightest celebration have in store for the Haven kids? Find out now on the Seventh Valkyrie. Chapter 22 Wonderlost. The 17th day of winter. Just after sunset. Strena. Many of the Haven children were running barefoot along the thin, sandy beach just past the musical pavilion. They were playing Wave Chaser, a game that was genius in its simplicity. When the waves went out, you chased them as far as you could on the wet sand without touching the water, and then rushed back in as the next wave came crashing your way. Whoever made it closest to the waves was judged through heated arguments before the next round, and the stakes were high because if the waves caught you, you were out and lost all of your points. There was never really a clear winner to the game, and for the younger kids, Wave Chaser was just sort of a chance to run around on the beach. Strena had seen games go on for hours, especially during a festival, when the sound of the music spilled late into the evening, and Mama Maven was usually easy to convince to stay a little while longer. Sitting at a little wooden table a bit further up the beach, Strena reminisced on many years playing Wave Chaser, but relished the fact that due to her newfound maturity, she was sitting this round out. Now that she was about 10 years old, most Haven children only had a rough idea of their ages and birthdays, Strena was reaching the point where Wave Chaser seemed a little bit less interesting than the mystical hum of the festival beyond her. Carmore, the other strong gifted boy in the Haven, was out there still playing, but he'd always been less mature than Strena was, even though he was almost 11. Carmore liked winning Wave Chaser, and he didn't like when you pointed out that the waves never caught him, likely because they had a tendency to bend around his ankles if they ever got too close. Strena had fought with him over his cheating in the past, but this year she had decided that she was about 10, and as such was over such childish matters. Also, she really didn't want to get in trouble again. The time she had already spent punished was tantamount to a lifetime. So instead of dwelling on Wave Chaser, Strena let her senses flare out and reveled in the cloud of color and emotion and sound and smell that drifted towards them from the festival. The Winter Festival was supposed to be a celebration for people of the Old City no matter what their age was. But as the days turned into night, the Haven children and other young ones of the Old City were shepherded down to the beachfront on the backside of the music pavilion. It was a little quieter and a little easier to watch over the small ones, who could be kept cozy and safe away from the bombardment of sounds and smoke and general adult things that happened deeper in the heart of the festival. That wasn't to say that the children, Haven or otherwise, weren't allowed to venture further into the festival to play games or dance or wheedle for treats from the stalls. But those little adventures only happened if a kid had a firmly held hand or a gentle arm around their shoulder. So, ever since last year, one of Strena's favorite activities had been bugging adults into going into the dance floor with her. Back when she'd been around 7 or 8, the sensations of the pavilion had been too much for her hyperactive senses. But now, she loved to find Mama Maven or Mr. Pores or the occasional wild woman or some of the aunties and uncles from the city, heck, even some of the men of shadows, and do her darndest to make them bring her into the crowd and teach her how to dance. It was not as difficult as it sounded. The beautiful aunties from the city always got a big smile and gave you snuggles or hugs when you tugged on their dress or came up and asked them to dance. And while the younger uncles weren't quite as excited at first, after a few dances they were snatched away from her by other beautiful aunties, especially if they were good at dancing. Now, one auntie had told Strena to think of her adorableness as a service to the world, and so that was what Strena did, and she glowed with happiness to enjoy the years while she could still dance and sing and let herself be swept into the magic from the safety of the Haven. There were no strict rules on when children were deemed ready to move out into the world from the Haven, but Strena had seen it happen to fellow Haven kids as young as 12 and as old as 15 or 16. Usually right around 12, Mama Maven would help you start to think about what you really wanted to do with the rest of your life. There were always places for young and eager workers in the old city, and Mama Maven could get you a talk with just about anybody you wanted. Strena hadn't done much thinking about what she wanted to do with her life, and she likely wouldn't for a while, especially with the scent of a steaming hot spiced pie suddenly filling the air. The man of shadows, Ravi, who'd been rotating on and off of watching over the children, had come back to the table and sat across from Strena with his friend Carries. Both had their hands full with steaming pies, which had bites already taken out of them and their insides bubbling magma red. Had Strena been a Huna, she would have "ad." Instead, she tiptoed over to the table, channeling all of her adorableness, and climbed up next to Ravi. Hey, Ravi! What's that? It smells so good! Ravi scratched her head with his free hand. This little one is no normal hot pie. This is a salamander pepper hot pie, and I'm sorry, but it is way too hot for a little earth spirit like yourself. Carries laughed as he bit in, eyes practically glowing as he suddenly exhaled steam from the hot pie. He groaned in pain or happiness, and then hissed as steam flared out of his nose. Then he let out a stream of curses, half of joy and half of pleasure, and then made his way to get ready for another bite. Strena turned to Ravi. I want to try one. Oh, well, I'd love to see you try it, but I don't want to be in charge of setting a little girl ablaze. I'm not a little girl. I'm 10, I think. I'm good with my gifts, and Miss Nisa says in the wild that I'd be almost considered a full wild speaker. That's not a little girl. Ravi waved the pastry towards Strena, whose eyes teared up at a simple wisp of the flavor. You smell that, right? Are you sure you want something that hot? Strena crossed her arms. I want to try it. Ravi winked at her, but brought the pastry back to his own mouth, calmly taking a bite and shaking his head. I'm sorry, Strena. Maybe when you're older. What? No fair! Strena whined and hemmed and hawed, but Ravi just gave an apologetic shrug as he munched down the treat. Watching the spiced pie slowly disappearing with each bite, Strena shot for the moon. If you don't give me a bite, I'll tell Mama Maven that you and Carries were talking about anaconda throats again. Carries started choking, and Ravi nearly spit out his pie. Where in the world did you hear that phrase? Carries was still choking and started to cough. Strena gave an internal celebration. She had no idea what that was, but she seemed to have gotten it right. You guys were talking too loud outside, and if Mama Maven made me chew on a flake leaf for asking about it, I know she would get really mad at you if she found that you were the one who taught me. I'm going to tell her that you were saying all about it. Ravi suddenly looked over his shoulder, spotting Mama Maven on the other side of the beach. Strena wasn't sure if Ravi had been a Haven kid when he'd been younger. She thought so. But she did know that Mama Maven liked him. For now. Turning back to Strena, Ravi relented and offered the salamander spice pie with a glint in his eye. You remind me of when I was younger, little one. Running out after dark, always sticking your nose in trouble when it shouldn't be. One day you'll get bit, but everyone does. Here, maybe it's today. Strena took the spicy pie from him with a joyous smile on her face, but paused as Ravi went to slap Carries on the back to stop him coughing. Holding it closer, the delicious flaky crust and bubbling red filling were equal parts tempting and terrifying. But she had come this far, and with her mouth triumphantly opened wide, Strena bit into the salamander pepper pie. The deliciousness hit first, but then everything was just fire, and suddenly Strena was sprinting towards the ocean, passing the children who had turned back in the most recent round of Wave Chaser. In another few steps, she was surging past Carmore, hurling herself tongue first into the ocean. She was pretty sure that her eyes and hair and mouth were all pulsing green as she was whipped around into the surf, soaked to the bone immediately but not caring, waving her head around in the sea, trying to get all the pulsing heat to leave. Several minutes later, Strena trudged back up onto shore, her tongue hurting just about as much as her pride and shivering as she entered the cold air. Mama Maven came over and fussed over her, asking if Strena wasn't just a little bit too old to be playing Wave Chaser, all while Ravi and Caries laughed in the background like cackling hounds. Still, Caries had a warm jacket to offer her when she got back to the benches, and Ravi had set a little blaze around himself to help her warm up. Mama Maven hovered around, fussing over her for a little while, telling her that she needed to be careful during the winter and that if she started to shiver too much, Mama Maven would send her home to get a change of clothes. But as Strena snuggled in towards Ravi, who put an arm around the young girl to keep her warm and teased her playfully with another chunk of spiced pie, Maven's expression softened. Rather than continuing to hum and hover and scold Strena, she turned and walked back to sit on her blanket with several old friends, watching the children play as the music continued to sway behind them.
You know, for an earth spirit, you actually did all right. The first time Caries tried one of those, he shot fire out of his mouth, and he doesn't even have the gift like you do.
Strena turned to Caries with wide eyes. The Uveran sighed and playfully punched Ravi in the shoulder, and the two started jawing off to each other about girls and fighting and adult stuff that Strena definitely didn't understand, but for now wasn't too concerned with. As she snuggled into Ravi's arm, Strena sighed and let herself just be 10 years old for a little longer. It was nice to have big, friendly people to rely on, to keep you warm when you were cold, and Strena hoped that when she was old as Mama Maven, she still had friends willing to give her big hugs and dance with her. Strena was settling in to enjoy the music when suddenly there was a shriek of a horn from the pavilion, followed by a hush. Caries and Ravi turned their heads in surprise, and then kept joking with each other as the music lulled, but for some reason Strena wasn't so quick to ignore it. She was starting to get a weird feeling. Looking over at Mama Maven, Strena noticed that the older women had started back into their conversation, all except one, an old wild woman named Boma, who had her gaze on the pavilion, too. Strena opened her mouth to comment just as the first scream erupted from the festival. When the bolts of fire, earth, and ice began to spiral out into the sky, the whole beach kicked into a frenzy. Want to know what happens next? Join us on Patreon to become a hero of Edera and get early access to episodes along with bonus features, director's commentary, and the full Tab to archive. You can also find other ways to support us at the links in the description, and we will see you next week.